everyone. This is Eddie Aparicio, and I'm joined by my co-host Anthony Tuan Corral, and this is Buzzer Beaters, a podcast that is dedicated to basketball with an emphasis on the NBA. Buzzer Beaters is a property of grumblingsmedia.com. You can find us at grumblingsmedia.com, Rumble, YouTube, under the profile Grumblings Media, as well as your traditional podcast outlets such as Spotify, Google, Apple, and Pandora. You can also find us on Facebook and X. The format of the show, if you haven't watched this is the first time watching, is that Tuan and I usually pick topics, up to 4 topics, with the intent of going no more than an hour. As the NBA season has winded down, we just had the draft. Last week, we covered 15 teams in our live after draft show. We also covered some free agency, some trades of the top 8 teams in the East and the top 7 teams in the West as they finished in the regular season. This week, we're going to go ahead and cover the remainder. So we're going to cover the next 7 teams in the East and then the next 8 teams in the West. So we're going to cover all 30 teams over in these last 2 weeks. So I know some things have happened and transpired since we had the show last week. There's been a lot more activity going on. It wasn't as rampant as it was, after the draft. It was crazy trying to keep up. It's kind of slowed down a little bit, but still, there's things that have been going on. And Tuan, I know you've been on top of it. I've been on top of it. So go ahead and maybe share what's transpired since we've had the last show.
Sure. So starting kind of alphabetically down some of the teams that we already covered last week, just really quick, the Denver Nuggets, they actually agreed with former Warrior Dario Saric. They agreed to a 2-year deal. So that was something that's transpired. Sorry, did I say Dallas? I meant Denver. I may have said Dallas. I meant the Denver Nuggets. So Denver gets a pretty decent player, I think, a pretty good backup player in terms of probably come off the bench type of rotational player for someone who lost a lot of players due to the luxury tax. So I think that's a pretty good pickup for them. What do you think, Ed? Do you think that's...
No, for sure. I mean, he's definitely a good rotational piece and has a lot of experience and is a stretch kind of 4 or 5. So I think that's a good fit.
Yep. Working my way down the line here. Let's see. Kind of a big one. The Lakers signed LeBron James to a 2-year max deal.
After they lured Bronny James over, from in the draft, right? They signed
correct.
Pick, right? And you knew that was coming after that happened.
Yep. You knew that was coming. I believe they also. Well, I didn't jot it down, but they also gave Bronny James a contract. So
they did.
Father
they did.
And
it was
son.
like 4 years, $7.9 million, I think it was.
Yeah.
So he's guaranteed a roster spot now.
Yep.
So,
kind of touching on the Lakers as well. The Milwaukee Bucks managed to pull Taurean Prince over to their squad. So he agreed to a deal. I don't have the specifics on the deal, but I know they agreed to a deal. So Taurean Prince will be leaving the Lakers and heading over to Milwaukee. I think that's a pretty good pickup for them.
Yeah, I agree too.
All right. Let's see. Working our way down the line here. For the Minnesota Timberwolves, a couple of acquisitions since last week. PJ Dozier agreed to a 1-year deal, as did Joe Ingles agrees to a 1-year deal. Joe Ingles, that guy must have been, where was he at? I forgot where he was at.
Yeah, he actually played for, I think it was, I forgot who it was. Might have been Memphis. It was one of those.
I remember him from his Utah days. That's
Utah
right.
Days. Also the Clippers, too. He played for the Clippers.
That's right. Yeah, he did play for the Clippers. Yep. And then the Knicks picked up Keita Bates-Diop. He joined via a sign and trade from the Nets. So the Knicks had some activity there.
Yep.
Let's see here.
Knicks are active, man. I got to give it to the Knicks, man. They were active. They started the whole thing, and they're still going, man. And we gave them a draft grade last week of 8, and they're still doing stuff. So that tells me that they're serious, man.
They got the Boston Celtics on their on their eyesight, and they're coming after them. So it's going to be interesting.
Yep.
The Orlando Magic, we mentioned last week, Morris Wagner signed a 2-year deal, and now his brother Franz Wagner agreed to a 5-year max deal, about $224 million. It could reach up to about $270 with some incentives. I think if he makes an all-star,
he becomes an all-star, right?
Yeah. There's some other things there, so that was good. Let's see. The Sixers also had some activity. They picked up from the Miami Heat. They picked up Caleb Martin So he
Ooh,
agreed
yeah.
to a deal.
That's a good signing, man. That kid is good, man. He's totally Miami Heat through and through. I'm surprised he left the Miami Heat, but hey, he's going to a contending team in his eyes. I mean, the Sixers are definitely, even more of a contender now. They have Paul George, so yeah, I
Yep.
can see why he made that move.
Yep. Me too. All right. Let's see. Moving down the line here, and I think that was it in terms of teams that we covered last week.
Okay. So for audience, we covered 15 teams last week, and as already mentioned, we're going to cover 15 teams this week. What we're going to do is start off with the West this time, and then jump back to the East, and then to the West, the East. We're going to go with the number 8 team in the West. So we're going to talk about the New Orleans Pelicans first, and then we're going to go after that. We're going to go to the Chicago Bulls after that. So that's how we're going to go back and forth, right? 8, 9, 9, 10,
Yep.
10. It's all the way work all the way down, all the way to the 15th seed for each. So, all right. So, as a reminder, we had a pre-draft show, and we covered the New Orleans Pelicans in our pre-draft show. And just as a reminder, these are the things that we thought they needed before the draft. And this is what we said. First, they needed a traditional point guard. They also needed a stretch 4 or 5, and also veteran rotational pieces. So with those needs in mind, Twan, what did they do?
So the New York Knicks the New Orleans Pelicans.
Yep.
Yeah, the Pelicans had the 21st and the 47th pick on the draft. Actually, they had the 21st pick, which they drafted Yves Missi out of Baylor.
Yep.
And then with the 47th pick, they did a trade with the Pelicans, and they picked up Antonio Reeves from Kentucky. So that's what they did in the draft.
Yep.
In terms of free agency activity, they signed Daniel Theus to a 1-year deal. And then the big pickup was the trade with the Hawks, where they picked up DeJounte Murray. Cost them a little bit. Move. They handed quite a bit of players and some picks and stuff to Atlanta, but they picked up DeJounte Murray, which covers the point guard need that we talked about in the offseason, and a little bit of the veteran presence.
Yep. The Pelicans lost a lot of guys in those moves with DeJounte Murray, and they also lost other people to free agency. I mean, they lost Larry Nance, Dyson Daniels. I mean, Dyson Daniels was a highly drafted point guard, but he just didn't necessarily pan out as they had hoped. They also lost Najee Marshall to Dallas, right? And he's a good rotational piece. And also lost Jonas Valanciunas to the Washington Wizards. So, they had some losses, but they had some gains too. DeJounte Murray was definitely a great pickup and actually addressed that traditional point guard kind of need. He's not initially a traditional point guard, but he's definitely an all-around point guard, which fits that need. They didn't necessarily meet the stretch 4 or 5 just yet. Rotational pieces, it's the free agency period is not yet done, but this is how we project their starting lineup to be. So we have point guard DeJounte Murray, we have shooting guard CJ McCollum, and last year CJ McCollum was their listed point guard. So this is a big, he's now settling into his traditional role of being a shooting guard like he did in Portland, CJ McCollum. So you have DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram for now, right? But he's been rumored to be possibly on the move, but we don't know yet. But then power forward Zion Williamson, and now center Yves Missi. Yves Missi seems to be kind of more of the mold of Steven Adams, like what they had before, right? Before they traded for Valanciunas. But I think Steven Adams, kind of like player, is a better fit for this team, and I think that's why they.
Well, I agree. They need a big man who's more defensive minded. I mean, they've got a lot of offense with Zion, with DeJounte, and with CJ McCollum. So, and even with Brandon Ingram, if he sticks around,
right?
They got a lot of offense, so they need somebody more little stable down low, can guard the low post, can block some shots, things of that nature.
Yep. But as far as rotation, so they have point guard Jose Alvarado, Grand Theft Alvarado. I love that nickname. It's a great one. They also have the shooting guard Herbert Jones, all-world kind of defensive kind of shooting guard type. He's a really good player out of Alabama. They have Trey Murphy, the guy out of Stanford. Yes. I think that guy has emerged. I think that guy is to be a player. He already is a player. And they also just got this the newly acquired through a draft Antonio Reeves. So with all of this in mind, we gave the New Orleans Pelicans a grade of a B+. All right. We thought that, this DeJounte Murray move was a big move for this team. I think this team is definitely a team on the rise. We already talked about the Yves Missi move. Jonas Valanciunas was more of a kind of a scoring center. That it wasn't necessarily the type of center that Steven Adams was before. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what they need, because, Jonas wants the ball sometimes, right? And they have to kind of, give in to that sometimes. And this guy, he's Missy, is one of those, kind of types of just kind of, he's going to put back up shots from rebounds. He's going to set the screens. He's going to do all the dirty work. So, this team, I think, did pretty good on the offseason. That's why I want to go ahead and give them
I agree.
a B+. So we gave them B+. All right, so now we're going to go over to the East now. We're going to the number 9 team in the East, and that is the Chicago Bulls. So what we said as far as what they needed before the draft, it was they needed more defense. They needed shooting, and they also needed a backup center. So what has transpired since we had the preview show for the draft for the Chicago Bulls?
So the Bulls had the 11th pick in the draft. They picked up Matas Buzelis out of the G League Unite.
Yep.
In terms of free agency, they picked up Jalen Smith on a 3-year, $27 million deal.
Good move.
He left the Pacers. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then they also did a trade with Oklahoma, the other half of the Caruso trade, which is they picked up Josh Giddey. Sort of a larger point guard.
Yep.
Don't know if he fits the needs. I think we spoke earlier about how much we like that trade for the Thunder side.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not sure that I liked it as much from the Chicago side, to be honest with you.
I agree with you. I mean, Josh Giddey is still a player that's trying to find his way in the league. He's got great attributes. He's a big dude. He's 6'8". He's actually a pretty good passer, just can't shoot. And I think that's the reason why he just didn't make it, with the Thunder, is that, teams kind of just sagged off of him and they took their chances and he couldn't do it, right? So that's the reason why they shipped him out. And I think the Chicago Bulls, realistically, after losing DeMar DeRozan, probably going to lose some other players too. I mean, there's Zach LaVine on there. They have Nikola Vucevic. These are all guys that are very valuable for other teams. Let's face it. I think these guys are kind of probably be in the rebuild stage here shortly, depending on what happens in the next few weeks with these other high profile players. But
there's a couple of other moves. There is a couple of other moves. Yep. They did a trade with the Kings. They picked up Chris Duarte.
Okay.
So they did that, and they signed Patrick Williams to a 5-year, $90 million deal. So
that's a lot, man, for Patrick Williams. But hey,
I agree. I'm not feeling great about the direction the Chicago Bulls are going in right now.
I think agree.
They're potentially spending money in the wrong place. I've always liked Duarte, so I think Duarte is a pretty decent pickup.
Yep.
But the Giddey trade, I'm not sure about. Jalen Smith pickup was really good. That's probably the best of their free agency moves. And then
they had to do something.
A little pricey.
Well, they had to do something because they lost Andre Drummond to the Sixers. Andre Drummond was the backup center, and he's a good backup center, right? And he backed up Nikola Vucevic. So, once they lost him, they had to do something to fill in that backup center slot, and they did that nicely, I think, with Jalen Smith. So, so as far as any other transactions, Twan?
No, that's what I had.
Okay, cool. So as far as their projected starting lineup, here's what it looks like. They have point guard Josh Giddey. They have shooting guard for now, Zach LaVine. They have newly signed small forward in Patrick Williams. They have newly drafted power forward / small forward Matas Buzelis. And they currently have, for now, the center Nikola Vucevic. The rotation, they have, essentially Kobe White, right? Kobe White could be coming off the bench. He could start. He played very well last year. It could be that they might put Josh Giddey as the backup. So it could be a vice versa, depending on the matchups between Kobe White and Josh Giddey. They also have shooting guard Torrey Craig, who's a little bit more defensive minded. And then they also have also a guy that they picked up from the Wizards, Adama Sanogo, as their backup center. So overall, this is what I thought based on all of their needs and moves. We gave the Chicago Bulls an offseason grade of a D. Anytime you lose a player of a DeMar DeRozan status and you don't really backfill it too much. You have Josh Giddey, you give up Alex Caruso to get Josh Giddey. I think that's a downgrade. And we both said that. They got, Jalen Smith is a great signing, but that's one piece, right? Yeah. So I just don't think Matas Buzelis, we'll see. He looks like a good player out of the G League. We'll see what happens, but this team is still a work in progress. We already mentioned that Vucevic and Zach LaVine are likely players that are probably going to be shipped away. This team is in total rebuild, and that's the reason why we gave
Yeah,
these guys.
and Buzelis is someone that during the draft we thought would go a little bit earlier than when he ended up going. So
Yep.
maybe they got something there.
We shall see, man. We shall see. All right, so now we're going to go back to the West. So now we're going to the Sacramento Kings. So this is what the offseason. So as far as some of their needs that we thought before the draft started is that they needed more efficient three-point shooting, which is kind of counterintuitive because this team did nothing but shoot threes, and that's pretty much their game. Essentially they drive and kick with the De'Aaron Fox, give it to like a Kevin Huerter, Harrison Barnes, although Harrison Barnes is along on the team, you'll cover that. And then they have Sabonis, who also does kind of the high pick and roll, also kind of can pass from the high, from the free throw line and so forth. And so this is interesting that they need more 3-point shooting. And,
what I think they need is they need more efficient 3-point shooting, right? They are one of the top shooting 3-point. They are one of the top 3-point shooting teams in the league. But if you look at their efficiency, I wanted to say they were ranked 19th or 20th in the league, which was pretty poor. So just because you're doing a lot of something doesn't mean it's working out for you, And so
I agree with you.
And so that's why I'm thinking, they needed to pick up players that were a little more efficient than the ones they had.
Right. And real quick, before you move on, Tuan, I just want to remind the audience we are live. And the reason why we're doing this live is because we want to hear from you. Give us any questions, any commentary. Please feel free to go ahead and submit those on your platform. So go ahead, Tuan. You were going to cover some of the transactions.
Live from here on out, by the way. So
from here on out, we're doing live. So All right.
So had we gone over the Kings last week, I think we would have given them a different grade than what they ended up doing. They had one pick in the draft, the 13th pick. They picked up Devin Carter out of Providence. They also re-signed Alex Len and Malik Monk. Alex Len to a 1-year, $3.3 million deal. Malik Monk to a 4-year, $78 million deal. And then some of the stuff that they had going on this coming week were DeMar DeRozan. They traded for a sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan. So we're talking about efficiency and upping their efficiency rating on their shooting. Although DeMar is more of a 2-point, although his 3-point shot
he's gotten better at the 3-point. He's getting better.
For sure, from inside the 3-point line, that dude is automatic. And then they picked up Jalen McDaniels via trade with the Raptors, and then Jordan McLaughlin joined on a 1-year deal. So that was kind of their free agency moves there.
Okay. They also, I think, signed Isaac Jones, a center from Washington State, on a 2-way contract. So it's just to round out their roster, but not a big deal. But anyway, so as far as projected starting lineup, we have point guard De'Aaron Fox. We have shooting guard now DeMar DeRozan. We have small forward Jalen McDaniels. We have now power forward Keegan Murray, and then center Domantas Sabonis. It's a pretty lethal starting lineup, man. So then you have the rotation pieces. You have a point guard of Devin Carter, shooting guard Malik Monk, shooting guard now Kevin Huerter, and then power forward Trey Lyles. And then they also have the aforementioned Alex Len, who they signed as well as a backup center. So it looks pretty good. I mean, they did decently given what's transpired. So as far as the offseason grade, we gave them a B. And it's primarily because, acquiring somebody like a DeMar DeRozan is a difference maker, especially for a team that's already lethal from an offensive standpoint. They didn't necessarily address their 3-point efficiency shooting need, but they got a really good, efficient 2-point scorer in DeMar DeRozan, which could open things up for, a Malik Monk, a Kevin Huerter, Keegan Murray. I mean, Keegan Murray's only been in the league for a couple of years, and he's getting better at the 3-point shot. Jalen McDaniels can shoot it too, but he's not really high efficiency guy. But, the drafting of Devin Carter brings a lot of more of a physicality, more defensive mindedness. I think this team lacks, and hopefully this will be the start of that trend. Hope moving forward that they become more defensive minded. Because that's, in my opinion, they're offensively a very strong team, but defensively, I think is where they miss out a little bit. They can do it in spurts, but they don't do it enough to be contending, in my opinion.
I agree. And their coach, I know, wants to improve that defense. So that's something that
Yep. All right, man. So we're going to go back to the East. All right. We're going back to the Atlanta Hawks. All right. So as far as the draft, before the draft, the transactions what we thought they needed is rotational depth, right? So with that in mind, what did they do?
So they had one draft pick originally in the draft. They ended up trading for one. So obviously they had the number one pick, which they picked up Zachary Risachet,
Yep.
or I'm trying to get his name right there. But so that was obviously a very good pick, the Frenchman. I say that 5 times in this draft, at least, the Frenchman.
Yep.
But and then they ended up trading, traded from the Hawks, or sorry, traded from the Heat. They picked up Nikola Djuric. I can't even say his name, man.
Yeah, good luck, man. I don't know either. We're probably talking anyway.
From KK Mega Basket.
Okay.
In terms of their free agency, mostly what they did was just trade DeJounte Murray. And they ended up, obviously, as you mentioned, they ended up picking up Larry Nance, Dyson Daniels, EJ Liddell, Cody Zeller, and then they picked up a first-round pick, 2 first-round picks, both in 2025 and 2027. But just right now, my overview on Atlanta is I think they're a little bit in chaos. I don't know what they're gonna do.
And I thought, bro, I thought they got rid of the wrong guy. I thought, that they should have moved away from Trae Young and stayed with DeJounte Murray. But losing DeJounte Murray, I mean, we all know that the Atlanta Hawks valued DeJounte Murray more than Trae Young. Trae Young's more expensive, of course, than DeJounte Murray. For the value, you're getting a lot more with DeJounte Murray. But they kept Trae Young. He's still a good player, man. I mean, he can break down defenses with his dribbling ability. He can shoot. We all know he's one of the first disciples of Steph Curry, right? So he's a poor man's Steph Curry. But, they just, they're in rebuild, honestly. They're not necessarily full rebuild. They're kind of in retool mode, right? So as far as their starting lineup, here's what they have. They have the point guard as Trae Young. They have their shooting guard as Bogdan Bogdanovic. They now have newly drafted Zachary Risachet. They have power forward from Duke, Jalen Johnson, who had a really good year last year. And then they have the center for right now, Clint Capella, I think, is the starter. But they have this up-and-coming big Onyeka Okongwu from USC, who actually showed out last year and showed his worth. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. But as far as rotation, we have the aforementioned Onyeka Okongwu as a center. They also have power forward Larry Nance, and then small forward DeAndre Hunter out of Villanova, and then the newly acquired Dyson Daniels. So with all of that in mind, we decided to go ahead and give the Atlanta Hawks an off-season grade of a B. Not too great, not too bad. I think they just should have kept DeJounte Murray instead of Trae Young. Depth is way better, and they added some veteran depth in Larry Nance. But I think one more veteran depth piece would have given him a higher grade, maybe even a B+. But they're going to be a playing team again. We shall see what happens. I mean, Zachary Risachet is going to get his time to play for sure. So we're going to see what this team's all about.
I'm with you, Eddie. Though I would have given him a better grade had they traded Trae Young instead of.
I agree.
I agree,
man. Yep. All right, man. So now we're going to go back to our team, the Bays team. All right, the Bays team. We are talking about our Golden State Warriors. And we got to take off our homer hats, right? We got to be very objective here, right? So we can't necessarily go over the top about the Warriors here. But this is our team, and this is what we thought they needed. We thought they needed a more consistent second scorer. They needed more size, athleticism on the wings, and a defensive center. With that all in mind, what are some of the transactions that address some of these needs?
So before I start, obviously, as all Warriors fans out there know, we lost Klay Thompson to the Dallas Mavericks. Klay, for those that don't know, Klay's my favorite Warrior. I mean, he's my favorite Warrior of all time. It was Chris Mullin, and then Klay came along and took that mantle. But I'm a huge Klay fan. That being said, I think it was the right move. I think it was good for him to leave.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I think it was time. And before you get into the grades, I think Dunleavy did a pretty decent job in the free agency market, given some of the choices that he had. So just wanted to kind of start with that. The Warriors had the 57 pick, which was a really weird pick. It was a pick they traded. Then they changed their mind and bought back for cash. So it was theirs, then it wasn't theirs, then it was theirs again. So they picked up Quentin Post out of Boston College, right? A 7-footer that can shoot 3-pointers, and so we'll see how that plays out. In terms of their free agency market, they picked up DeAnthony Melton, on a 1 year, $12.8 million deal. He was previously of the 76ers, had some back issues, I think, which is why some would consider that a pretty good price for a player of DeAnthony Melton's caliber.
He hasn't been in the league that long. He's only been in the league for like 4 years, so he's still young.
Correct. Yep. And in that trade of the pick, they also picked up Lindy Waters III. So that was part of that
from the Thunder.
Pick, from the Thunder. Then they picked up Slow-Mo from Minnesota.
Slow-Mo.
They picked him up on a 3-year, $27 million deal.
That's Kyle Anderson, for those of you who don't know who Slow-Mo is.
Yeah, sorry, Kyle Anderson.
It's Chris Mullin 2.0, essentially, or maybe not Chris 1.5.
I can't hate on that. And then their kind of big signing is Buddy Hield from a sign and trade out of the 76ers for a 2-year, $21 million deal. I could go into this more, but this is your bit, Eddie, so you go ahead. Speak to it.
Let's look at it. They lost Klay Thompson. They lost Chris Paul. They were in the running for Paul George, right? But unfortunately, he signed, he went out in free agency, and then he signed with the Sixers, and that pretty much squashed the chances for the Warriors to get him. They are definitely in the running or the rumor mill to try and get someone like a Lauri Markkanen, although the local radio shows are not really loving that guy at all. They think that some other guys are better value elsewhere, and I tend to agree with that. But having a Lauri Markkanen would definitely help meet that more consistent second scorer need that we think that this team needs. But given all of this, right, what we have as their projected starting lineup, we have as point guard Stephen Curry. Now, what's going to happen is, does this mean Andrew Wiggins now moves to the shooting guard, or does that mean Brandon Pajemski? I think it just depends on matchups, right? I think, in my opinion, DeAnthony Melton. See, they have a lot of interchangeable parts, but I think Andrew Wiggins is their best defender in when he's engaged mentally. And they have Jonathan Kuminga. They kind of didn't think that those two could play together last year for a period of time, but they figured it out eventually. So I think to have their best chances of winning, they need to have both those guys on the court at the same time. So you have Steph Curry, Andrew Wiggins as a shooting guard, Jonathan Kuminga as a small forward, power forward / and then you have Draymond Green as their power forward, and then Trace Jackson Davis as their starting big. As far as the rotation, we have DeAnthony Melton, newly acquired, probably going to be playing shooting guard / point guard. You have Buddy Hield, also a shooting guard, not necessarily a point guard. He can play small forward too, but he's kind of small. You have Brandon Pajemski. I mean, all these guys are very similar size, right? You can see they're all interchangeable, right? Then you have Kyle Anderson as a small forward / power forward. Then you have Kevon Looney and Quentin Post. I mean, they're still small, man, right? They're still small. What's good is that Trace Jackson Davis and Brandon Pajemski are getting a lot of good experience being on the USA Select team. That they're been playing with these big time players, and this is really good experience for these guys. And we're going to touch upon the USA Select team as well as the Olympics coming up in ensuing podcasts. But let me ask you something, Twan. Have you seen any of the footage of these practices that are going on?
I haven't had a chance. No.
It's just a quick little aside. I was watching it, and go ahead and watch it. It's actually pretty. There was this white kid. I'm like, dude, who is this white kid? Because I know all the players, man. And this white kid was good, man. He was like balling. And I'm like, who is this dude? I had to kind of look up who the USA Select team was. Dude, it's this guy. Have you heard of this guy named Cooper Flagg? Have you heard of that name? Okay, so he's supposed to be a highly recruited 5-star recruit player, 17 years old. He's already committed to going to Duke, and he's widely considered to be a one-and-done player at Duke this year and go probably number 1 pick in the NBA draft. And I got to tell you, man, I saw this kid play against some of these guys, and granted, these the Steph Curry's, LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard, Joel Embiid, they're not playing the hardest, right? They're reserving themselves, right? But, man, this dude was balling. I was like, who is this kid? He looked good, man. You got to check him out. And he's like 6'8". He's like a 6'8" kid, 17 years old, and this dude is balling.
Where's he coming out of? Do you know? High school-wise?
He's a high school player.
Where? What part of the country?
I forgot. I know he's somewhere in the East Coast. I don't know exactly where, but this guy coming out of Duke, it's like a small town he's coming out of, and this guy's a baller. Anyway, so I just wanted to bring that up. Quick little aside. But anyway, so we talked about the projected starting lineup and then the rotation pieces for the Warriors. We're talking about the Warriors, and as given all of this, what we decided to go ahead and give them a grade. We actually upped it up. We thought initially it was going to be a C. but I think, they made some moves. Once they made that Buddy Hield move, I kind of bumped them up, as well as Kyle Anderson, because prior to that, it was barely anything, right? And now I think Mike Dunleavy has done a decent job in trying to fill that void that Klay Thompson has left behind. And it's a big void, man. I mean, Klay Thompson's a truly beloved player here in the Bay Area. And you pointed out he's one of your favorite players. He's definitely one of my favorite players, top two. We talked in a previous podcast. This guy had a Willis Reed moment, right, in the playoffs in 2019 when he tore his ACL, right? He went into the locker room, came back, shot the free throws, and trying to go play D. And he was doing that on a freaking tore ACL. That did it for most fans in the Bay Area. That guy was just money. But you could tell he just wasn't very happy coming off the bench. There's been a lot of talk that he played golf with Joe Lacob, right before a few weeks ago, and they didn't even talk about contract, and that was kind of weird. They thought, okay, they both kind of saw the writing on the wall. They just didn't want to talk about it. They knew this was it. And I guess when you play golf with Joe Lacob, that means you're done. I don't know. We'll see. But
my 2 cents on that front was, I think they wanted to keep him, but they were letting him know that he was last on the list. Like, we got to make a bunch of deals, and then when we're done, we get to you. And Clay's like, yeah, I'm not having that, And just one other thing to point out, you talked about the Warriors having a lot of duplicate type players. I think that they're still trying to do something, because we didn't even touch on Moses Moody, who is now as a wing player, like, way behind. And I think that guy's severely underrated. If you look at our previous shows, I had a bunch of people trying to pick him up because I think he's a little bit of a diamond in the rough. Someone that could get a little more time, that could actually be a very, very good player. And given his demeanor, he's just going to sit and wait his turn. And I don't know if that's coming now.
We shall see, man. But he's a good player that I think he deserves his shot. He's definitely proven when he gets his shot, he definitely performs. And I think Steve Kerr is grossly underutilizing that guy.
I agree.
Yeah. All right, man. So we're going to go back to the East. We're flip-flopping from the West to the East and West and East. And now we're going to go to the Brooklyn Nets. All right. Yes. Now, we know the Brooklyn Nets didn't have much of an offseason as far as the draft, because they didn't have any draft picks. This is what happens when we try and do the James Harden, Kevin Durant, and Kyrie Irving show all in one. You lose draft picks, and then this is what you end up with right here. This situation that you're in right now.
Yep, absolutely. All right.
Well, we thought they needed, before you get into it, what we thought they needed was a true point guard and perimeter shooting. So with that in mind, what did the Brooklyn Nets do to address those needs?
So as you mentioned, no draft picks for them. The only team, I believe, that didn't have any draft picks.
Correct.
They signed and kept Nick Claxton, 4-year, $100 million deal, which I think is that's a good pickup. They traded with the Knicks for Bojan Bogdanovic, so he's on their squad now. And then they did a sign and trade with the Knicks for Mamadi Dakiti, and then Shake Milton, also a sign and trade with the Knicks. So they got some of those pieces a little bit there. I wouldn't say fully, but they're also in rebuild, kind of retooling mode. The rumor has that, Ben Simmons is available if you want him. I don't know, what you can get for him, but that seems to be something that's being said for a name that hasn't been spoken too much lately in the last year or two.
Yeah. And, they do have some talent on their team, not necessarily like all-star talent kind of players. They're all kind of rotation pieces all in one team, in my opinion. The only guy that I think is worth, noting that's actually a pretty good player that I think is up and coming is Nick Claxton. They re-signed him, right? The 4-year, $100 million deal. He's now their center. I think they're going to try and build around him. But, they didn't do much on the offseason. They were hamstrung because they couldn't really do anything. And I think they're in total rebuild mode, right? Which is why, they went ahead and got all these draft picks, right? For Mikal Bridges from the Knicks. So they recognize that they were in rebuild mode, and they're just stockpiling draft picks like the Oklahoma City Thunder have done. And they're going to be, we all know that the Oklahoma City Thunder are poised to be really good for the next few years. And, I think Brooklyn Nets kind of saw that and are trying to replicate that as well. So
and I think that the Brooklyn Nets are going to serve as a story to teams that are trying to build super squads.
Yeah.
Because the Brooklyn Nets, well, not only that, they were on a nice trajectory prior to all of this. They had Jared Allen, they had some pieces in place kind of moving on the way up. They weren't, I wouldn't say they were championship ready, but they were like Oklahoma City was around that time. They were acquiring pieces, they were moving up, and they gave that all up for Harden, Kyrie, and Durant, and that kind of blew up in their face when they couldn't win anything, and now they're left in the wake of all of that mess, and it's a little tough. I think hopefully teams start learning. You got to start from within and then put complementary pieces around. But if you don't start with the draft, it's going to be really hard, even if you get a bunch of all-stars.
Yep. No, I agree, man. I agree. So, but they're in a mess of it. They're in a mess, but they have to put out a team, and the team that they're going to be putting out is right here. Their projected starting lineup is point guard Dennis Schroeder, shooting guard Cam Thomas. He's a pretty good player. Shooting small forward Cameron Johnson, also a decent player. Again, rotational pieces in my opinion. They have a power forward Dorian Finney-Smith, and then they have the newly signed 4-year deal Nick Claxton as their center. As far as rotation, for now, we have Ben Simmons as their backup point guard. We also have the newly acquired Bojan Bogdanovic from the New York Knicks. We have small forward Jalen Wilson. We have power forward Noah Clowney, and then center Day'Ron Sharpe. You can see there's a bunch of no names on this team, man. There's only really 2 or 3 players that are really good rotational pieces on this team that most teams would want, right? So they're definitely, it screams rebuild big time, man. So with all that in mind, we gave the Brooklyn Nets an offseason grade of an F.
Yeah.
And I don't think nobody can argue that, man. It's ugly, and that's the ugliest grade that we have out of all of our teams that we're covering. We are essentially almost halfway done with our show here with about 8 teams left. But the next team we have in the West is the Houston Rockets.
Yep.
Right. So what we said that they needed shooting, and they needed veteran rotation. This is a good up-and-coming young team. So they didn't have too many needs because they have a pretty good squad as it is right now. So with that in mind, the shooting and veteran rotation needs, what did the Houston Rockets do to address that?
Yep. So they had the 3rd pick in the draft. Behind the 2 Frenchmen, they ended up picking up Reed Shepherd out of Kentucky, which was a pretty good pickup. Yep. Aaron Holiday, Drew's brother, they signed him on a 2-year, $10 million deal. And then they picked up AJ Griffin via a trade with the Hawks. That's what they did. And, I think the Houston Rockets, I think we've talked about this already. I think Houston and San Antonio are 2 teams that are on the precipice of starting to become, playoff contending teams for the next handful of years. And there's going to be either the Warriors or the Lakers or the Suns, one of these older teams that are going to start fading out a little bit. And these young bucks are going to start, making it very hard for some of these older teams to start making the playoffs, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I mean, the Warriors barely made the play-in because these guys were on their tail, right? So they're up and coming. They're a young, they're a young squad that's coached well by Ime Udoka, former Boston Celtics coach. So he's actually got a pretty decent team here. So as far as after all of their transactions that you noted, there's one more. They did sign a 2-way deal with undrafted rookie out of Oregon in Foley Dante. So he's actually somebody that they added to their squad. They're also rumored to be after Zion Williamson, Donovan Mitchell before that, but he got re-signed, or Devin Booker. So they're definitely eyeing one of these guys, and we'll see what happens. But as far as projected starting lineup, what I have is point guard Fred VanVleet, shooting guard Jalen Green, small forward Dylan Brooks, power forward Jabari Smith, and then center Alperen Sengun, who's essentially Nikola Jokic light. Really, I mean, this kid is good. He's a center out of Turkey. He's very offensive, gifted. He's kind of out of the same mold as Nikola Jokic. Doesn't have the same passing ability, but a lot of the same moves and can shoot as well. So as far as rotational depth, I have point guard Amen Thompson, one of the Thompson twins. Then we also have a shooting guard, newly drafted Reed Shepherd. We also have small forward out of Villanova, Cam Whitmore last year. And then we also have Steven Adams, who they got from Memphis in a trade last season. But Steven Adams was pretty much hurt all season. But he's their backup center. So that's a pretty good backup center for Alperen Sengun, man. So, but, they still, even though they did okay in getting, a Reed Shepherd, in my opinion, I thought they would have been better if they got Rob Dillingham, in my opinion, instead of Reed Shepherd. And for that reason, we gave them a C. All right. We just thought that Reed Shepherd's a good player, but I thought Rob Dillingham would have met the needs of this team better, even though he's not in this. I mean, he shoots 44% from 3. which is better than Reece Shepherd did. And this guy is like, can tear down defenses pretty well. So that's why we thought that the Houston Rockets deserved a C. So now we're going to go ahead and flip flop back to the East. We're going to go to the Toronto Raptors. So what we said in our pre-draft show from the Toronto Raptors is that they needed depth. Everybody needs depth, right? I mean, the Boston
Yes.
Celtics pretty much set that precedent that everybody needs depth, right? But the backup point guard is something that they needed. Is something that they needed, and they also needed wing defenders. So with those needs in mind, what did they do?
Well, the Toronto Raptors were probably one of the busiest teams this offseason. They had quite a bit of activity. They ended up initially had 2 draft picks. They ended up getting 4, starting with their own pick at the 19th. They drafted Jacoby Walter out of Baylor. Then with the 31st pick, they drafted Jonathan Mogbo out of San Francisco. So right down the street here from us.
Yep, USF. Yep,
and then go Dons. And then in a trade with the Kings, they got Jamil Sheed out of Houston.
Jamal Sheed,
Yep. And then in a trade with the Grizzlies, they picked up Ulrich Chomchi out of the NBA Academy Africa, which I'm assuming that's an academy that they teach in Africa about the NBA, but we'll see how that comes out. Their free agency transactions, Garrett Temple to a 1-year deal, so they signed Garrett Temple. Emmanuel Quickly to a 5-year, $175 million deal. The big one they had was a 5-year max contracts to Scotty Barnes for starting at 224 and change, could go up again to 270 depending if he makes all-stars and things of that nature. Then they had a couple of pickups via trade. They picked up Davion Mitchell, which I think when we were talking, we thought, that their backcourt was going to be pretty good defensively with Off Night and I can't remember the guy they drafted, but so he's gone. Davion Mitchell's going to be with the Toronto Raptors now, and Sasha Vensonikov from they traded with the Kings as well.
Yep.
So those were a couple of pickups there they picked up via trade.
They also picked up the option for Bruce Brown too.
Oh, so did they? Okay.
They picked up the $23 million option on Bruce Brown. So Bruce Brown was a highly coveted free agent guy, but they went ahead and picked up his option. Doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be on the team. They could trade him, right? Yep. That's why they do that stuff sometimes. Is they either keep the player or they piece him into a trade, right? They also signed on a 2-way. They did a Brandon Carlson out of the Utah Utes. He was undrafted, so they signed him to a 2-way deal. So with all of these needs or with all of these transactions, here's what we have as their projected starting lineup. We have Emmanuel Quickly as their point guard. We also have a shooting guard, Grady Dick. We have small forward, RJ Barrett, power forward, Scotty Barnes, and then center, Jakob Poeltl. Rotation would be point guard, Davion Mitchell, newly drafted Jacoby Walter. We have also the newly optioned signed Bruce Brown. We also have power forward Chris Boucher out of Oregon. And then we also have backup center Kelly Olynyk. He's also another valuable piece that a lot of teams were kind of looking at as well. We don't know. These guys are always doing something, right? But, what we said is they needed a backup point guard. Okay, they got Davion Mitchell, right? They also got Jamal Shead, right? So they have a backup point guard right now. They re-signed Scotty Barnes, and they picked up the option for Bruce Brown. They drafted Jacoby Walter, but they really didn't address their wing defending needs. So pretty much running back the same squad with a few little ancillary pieces around there. So with that in mind, we went ahead and give these guys a C+. All right. This is what we gave them as a grade, as a C+. Oh, we have a comment here.
All right.
So we have Cheddar Steve, yo, Raptor fan in the house. Right on, Cheddar Steve. I like it. Right on.
I wonder if he's related to Cheddar Bob. Wasn't that from Adam Sandler movie, I think, if I'm not mistaken? Maybe he's Cheddar Bob's cousin or something like that. Oh, Cheddar Bob. No, Cheddar Bob is from, I remember now, from 8 Mile, Eminem.
Oh, look at this.
Cheddar Bob is from.
I've seen Drake's dick and ain't big. It's a white. Okay. All right, Cheddar.
Wow.
Cheddar Steve.
Wow.
Okay.
Put the cheddar away. Damn.
Exactly. All right, man. So now we're gonna move on to we're going back to the West. We're gonna go back to the Utah Jazz. So the Utah Jazz, what we said is that they needed a true point guard again. They needed more center depth, more shooting, and veteran rotational depth. So with that in mind, what did the Utah Jazz do?
So they had 3 of their own picks this year. They had the 10th, the 29th, and the 32nd. With the 10th pick out of Colorado, they picked up Cody Williams. With the 29th pick out of USC, they picked up Isaiah Collier. And then with the 32 pick out of Duke, they picked up Kyle Filipowski, which I think was a pretty good pickup because I think most people had him as a first-round pick, not a second-round pick. So I think that was a pretty good pickup. And then in terms of big man depth, they signed Drew Eubanks to a 2-year, $10 million deal, who had previously been with the Suns. I don't know if that's overpriced or not. I mean, I guess it's pretty decent
$5 million a year
for a big. Yeah, for a big. But that's their. Oh, and then and they also, I mean, for those that remember, Omer Yurtseven, who I remember him from having quite a summer league for Miami back in the day. I think he had like 8 or 9 blocks in a game or something, some crazy number. They ended up waiving him, so he's a free agent.
All right. So with all of that, here's their starting projected lineup. We have point guard Colin Sexton. We have their shooting guard, the black hole Jordan Clarkson. We have small forward for now, Lauri Markkanen, right? Lauri Markkanen has been rumored for many teams, including the Golden State Warriors, but we shall see. We have power forward John Collins, and then we also have center Walker Kessler. For the rotation, Isaiah Collier out of USC, and then Keontae George. One of those two can come in and fill in for Colin Sexton or Jordan Clarkson, depending on what the need is. They have shooting guard Cody Williams, the newly drafted Cody Williams. And then they also have a small forward Taylor Hendricks, and then newly drafted Kyle Filipowski. So because of all of this, I thought they did a decent job in addressing some of the needs. So what we gave the Utah Jazz as an offseason grade, we gave them a B, which, I think it's because they actually drafted pretty well. I think that they got 3 decent players. I mean, Cody Williams he slipped. I don't know why he slipped, but he slipped, right? Yeah. And then and he was projected to be like top 4, top 5 pick. And by the way, did you know he's also Jalen Williams' brother? Did you know that? He's Jalen Williams,
I didn't know that.
The Oklahoma City Thunder brother. So, and then if you look at them, you go, okay, I can see the resemblance. Anyway, and then they got Isaiah Collier. I don't know if you saw the game. We'll talk about the summer league after we finish all the coverage. But Isaiah Collier was balling out, man. He played well, man, in the summer league. Of course, he's playing against other summer league players, but you can see the potential with this kid. So I thought that this guy, it looks good. Kyle Filipowski, he struggled a little bit. We'll talk a little bit more when we get there. We'll talk about the summer league after we're done covering all of the different teams here. But with all of this in mind, as far as what we went ahead and gave them a B, and these are the reasons why. We thought that they addressed their needs decently, but it's just their draft. They got good value in those draft picks, especially out of Cody Williams and Isaiah Collier. So that's the reason why we gave them a B. All right, so now we're going to go to the Charlotte Hornets. We're going back to the East. Again, we're flip-flopping between the East and the West. And so now we're going to go ahead and go to the Charlotte Hornets. So as far as what we thought they needed better point guard depth, and they also needed veteran depth. So with that in mind, what did these guys do, Tuan?
All right. So the Hornets had a couple of draft picks, no trades that they did during the draft. So with the 6th pick out of Cole Basket, Tijani Saluan, and with the 6th pick, and then with the 42nd pick out of Colorado, they picked up KJ Simpson. In terms of free agency activity, Miles Bridges, he's going to come back on a 3-year deal. And then via trade, they picked up Josh Green in a trade with the Mavericks, and then they picked up Reggie Jackson in a trade with the Nuggets.
Okay, cool. Yep. All right, and then you already said Reggie Jackson, right? Yeah, you got that.
I did.
Okay.
Yep, I just said it. Yep.
All right, cool. All right. So as far as their projected starting lineup, we have point guard LaMelo Ball. We have shooting guard. I mean, it's probably going to be Brandon Miller, although he's probably more of a small forward. But now, I thought he was going to be moving over to the shooting guard. But now that they signed Miles Bridges, he's probably going to, they're going to go in between those two guys. I mean, it depends. And they might put this Tijani Saluan as a backup power forward. But in the starting lineup, I had LaMelo Ball, Brandon Miller. Now we have Miles Bridges. And then more than likely, it's probably going to be someone like maybe Tijani Saluan, and maybe their power forward. And then their center could be either Nick Richards or Mark Williams. I have Mark Williams because he was their starter before he got hurt. So I have him. And then as far as rotation, you have the backup point guard and Reggie Jackson. You also have the newly drafted Cody Martin. Then you have the newly acquired Josh Green out of Dallas. And then you have their backup center in Nick Richards. So although it was a decent draft, they managed to get a backup point guard with Reggie Jackson. I think they needed to shore up their team with more veteran depth, which is what we had thought they needed.
Yep,
So for that reason, we gave them a grade of a C for the Charlotte Hornets. So, all right, now we're going to go back to the West. We're going to the Memphis Grizzlies. So
Correct.
What we thought about the Memphis Grizzlies before the draft started, they needed a starting center. They needed additional ball handling. They needed a starting wing, and they definitely needed to be healthy and not do dumb stuff, right?
Yes.
Yes. All right, man. So with that in mind, man, what did they do to address those needs? Starting center, ball handling, starting wing, and health.
So as of my checking yesterday, the Memphis Grizzlies they had 3 draft picks, but they didn't really have any free agency activity or anybody of significant that hit the radar. So I'll just go over their picks here. Speaking about a starting center, out of Purdue with the number 9 pick, which a lot of people thought might have been a little overly aggressive. However, in summer league, he looked a little svelte. He looked a little.
He did. He lost a lot of weight, man.
He was moving around a little bit. So Zach Edey out of Purdue.
Yep, he looked decent, man. Yep. I mean, at first he was kind of slow, but then he kind of figured out the speed of the game, and then he looked decent, man. I got to give it to him. And he put a lot of work in his body, man. You could see it. He looks way more slender and better movement. So,
which is always a good sign when a player is able to, adjust to some of the things that they know, and it shows up physically. That's a good sign. And then out of Washington State with the 39th pick, the Grizzlies drafted Jalen Wells, and then via a trade with the Pistons, with the 53rd pick, they picked up Cam Spencer out of Connecticut. So that was their draft activity. And as I mentioned, as of yesterday, no real free agency activity. Maybe a couple of two-way deals or something after the trade, but no major free agents were picked up.
Okay, so with that, their projected starting lineup, we have point guard Ja Morant. We have more than likely going to be shooting guard. It could be either Marcus Smart or they can go Vince Williams, depending on the matchup. They have small forward Desmond Bane. They have Triple J power forward Jaren Jackson out of Michigan State. And now they have the newly drafted Zach Edey as their center. As far as rotation, they still have Derrick Rose. Can you believe Derrick Rose is still playing, man? Point guard Derrick Rose. We already talked about Vince Williams. They can go back and forth between him and Marcus Smart. They have Cam Spencer, who is actually a pretty damn good shooter at a UConn and actually did pretty well in the summer league as well. We'll talk about that a little later. And then the power forward GG Jackson, and then also backup center out of Gonzaga Brandon Clark. So, I think that the roster makeup. They needed a starting center. They did that. They got Zach Edey. I mean, we'll see if he's really going to be a starting center or if he's going to be a rotational piece. But the fact that he went ahead and lost a lot of weight, man, and looks more like an NBA body, honestly, man, and moved a lot better.
Yep.
I don't know, man. If this guy does this and continues doing that, I mean, this guy could be.
No, they might have gotten a pick up there.
Yep. They have a lot of wing depth too. So I mean, that's the strength of their team. They have like Santi Aldama, John Conchar, Zaire Williams. They have Vince Williams. I mean, last year was an off year for them because of what happened with John Morant. But they actually have decent talent on that team if they stay healthy. So with that, what we thought, we gave them a grade of a B for the offseason for the Memphis Grizzlies. It was decent. I mean, especially with Zach Edey looking like he did. We'll see, man. Oh man. Okay, we got more. More.
Cheddar Bob's on a roll. We might just want to let him talk there.
Well, let's see. Are any of these appropriate? Let's see.
I'd leave them off. All
right, Cheddar Steve. You put better comments, man. We'll put them up there for you, man. Yeah. All right, bro. All right. So anyway, thanks for participating, though. Appreciate it. All right. So let's go to the Washington Wizards. So. Washington Wizards, we went ahead and said that they needed more shooting and they needed more rotational depth. These are the same themes for a lot of teams, man. More shooting, rotational depth, right?
Yep.
So with that in mind, what did the Washington Wizards do?
So the Washington Wizards really had only one draft pick, and they ended up picking up out of Perth Alex Sarr, who a lot of people thought maybe should have been the first pick in the draft.
Yep.
right? A mini Wembayama is kind of the way that he was. Mini being, he's still a 7-footer, but Wembayama is so freaking huge. So so that was a pickup, which I think was a good pickup. And then in a trade with the Blazers, they picked up Bub Carrington out of Pittsburgh with the 14th pick. And then in a trade with the Knicks, they picked up Keshawn George out of Miami with the 24th pick. Now the Knicks were trying to offload a lot of their picks, so Washington ended up grabbing one of those, which I think good for them. And then in terms of their free agency, Jonas Valanciunas signed to a 3-year, $30 million deal, which he left the Pelicans. I think that's a pretty good pickup because now you got a pretty good center tandem there. Valanciunas is going to probably be the starter. I'll let you get into that in a minute while Alex Sarr comes up to speed. But I think that's a pretty – at $10 million a year, shoot, I'd take him, for that price. That's a pretty decent price. And then Malcolm Brogdon, he joined via a trade with the Blazers, and then they re-signed Rashawn Holmes to a 2-year contract.
Man, I got to tell you, these guys are pretty active, man, for being like a cellar dweller of a team. I mean, they were the 12th seed in the East. And, usually some of these teams are total rebuilding, not doing much, but these guys are very active, man. I was pretty impressed. But
their moves are decent. They were
decent. I agree.
Moves. Yeah,
I agree, man. So as far as projected starting lineup, I have Malcolm Brogdon as their point guard. We have shooting guard. I don't know if Jordan Poole will be this if he's going to continue coming off the bench or if he's going to start. I think they might have to have him start, at a need. Then they have small forward Kyle Kuzma for now, although because he's also rumored to be involved in potential trade talks with other teams. They also have a power forward. Here's the thing: they could put Alex Sarr as a power forward / center along with Jonas Valanciunas, right? Yeah. They could do that twin tower thing. We know that the Minnesota Timberwolves did that very well. So they could do the same thing here, right? They have some flexibility. So now, with the rotation, they have point guard Tyus Jones, who's already their point guard last year. Now they have Malcolm Brogdon. Malcolm Brogdon is going to be the starter, and now Tyus Jones, which is more suited for him, a backup point guard type of role. You have a shooting guard, small forward, Corey Kispert. You have small forward, shooting guard, Bilal Coulibaly. You have also Patrick Baldwin. Remember him with the Warriors?
Yeah.
Right? You have Bub Carrington as well as another point guard that can come off the bench. Then you have center Rashawn Holmes. I mean, this team looks a lot better than they did last year, right? So, so for that reason, we are giving the Wizards a B+. B+ grade is actually pretty good for a team of that caliber. They did decently. So good, bravo to the Wizards for doing stuff in the offseason and making their team a lot better. We shall see. There's going to be more needs down the line, or more transactions down the line. But for what they've done to this far, it looks pretty damn good, man. So, all right. So now we're going to go to the West. We're going to go to the San Antonio Spurs. All right. So what we said the San Antonio Spurs needed, they needed veteran depth. Again, the same theme, veteran depth. They also needed a point guard. All right. So with that in mind, what did they do?
So the Spurs had 2 picks in the draft, and then they picked one up via a trade. With the 4th pick, which was their own, out of Connecticut, they picked up Stephon Castle, which both Eddie and I, after watching the NCAA championship, thought he was probably one of the best players on the court that day. Very good defensive player, kind of everywhere. So I thought that was a good pickup for them. With the 36th pick in a trade with the Pacers, they picked up Juan Nunez out of Radio Farm Ulm. And then with their own 48th pick, they picked up Harrison Ingram out of North Carolina. In terms of their needs, both veteran leadership and a point guard, they got both in one, which is Chris Paul. They signed him to a 1-year, $11 million deal. He just, he had an extension for a $30 million deal, so they got him for 33% off, or 66% off, I should say, for 33% of the value. So Chris Paul, I think, is going to do wonders for that squad. He is probably one of the perfect pieces for Wembayama and some of those young players. And then in terms of a trade with the Kings, they picked up old HB. The Black Falcon, I believe, is what his name is.
Yes, they call him the Black Falcon, the senator, because he's so poised. He's such a poised guy, yeah.
Which is also veteran leadership, right? Harrison Barnes is a champion. He's been around. I think they did pretty decent here in terms of in terms of veteran leadership. A couple of older guys, but good veteran leadership.
Yeah, I agree, man. So I thought that they did a decent. I actually had them graded lower before, but some of these some of these recent picks that, or some of these recent transactions they did, I think kind of bumped them up a little bit.
Yeah.
So, but as far as, their projected starting lineup, so I have, Chris Paul as their point guard. Then we have the shooting guard, Stephon Castle. More than likely going to be small forward. Either going to be, depending on matches, probably going to be Harrison Barnes realistically. Maybe Devin Vassell potentially coming off the bench. But it's they can interchange right there, right? They have Jeremy Sohan as their power forward. They also have Zach Collins, right? They can kind of swap between those two. And then they have Victor Wembanyama, right? So as far as rotation, you have backup point guard Trey Jones. We already mentioned the kind of going back and forth between Harrison Barnes and Devin Vassell. You also have power forward Keldon Johnson. I mean, all of a sudden, this team looks decent, right? I mean, they added just a couple veteran pieces in Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes, and then they got to Stephon Castle. I think is going to be like a Kawhi Leonard-like type player.
Yeah.
I mean, this team is going to be pretty good, man. So, with all that in mind, I initially had these guys with the C, but I went ahead and changed it to a B.
I think that's a good. Yeah, I think that's a good.
Because they did some things that kind of make themselves better. They have pressure right now to perform. Victor Wembanyama is a transcendent player, and they need to do something now. It accelerated their building of a roster because of what they found in this gem of a player in Victor Wembanyama. So if anybody can do it, it's the San Antonio Spurs. They can turn it around pretty quick, and just adding two pieces like that is going to help this team tremendously. So
the only potential risk, and it's an obvious one, is Chris Paul's health. I mean, it's been many seasons since he's played, in excess of 65, 70 games, and I wouldn't expect him to. So that would be the only drawback that I can see in picking up Chris Paul is just his availability.
Yeah, no, I agree. All right, man. So we only have the two more teams to cover, and then we're going to go have our overall grades, and then we'll go through the Summer League a little bit. So, all right. So next team that we're going to cover are the Detroit Pistons. So what we said that they needed is, again, more shooting. Everybody wants more shooting, and then they also needed leadership. So with that in mind, what did they do?
Yeah, Detroit was pretty busy. So they had one of their own draft picks, which was the number 5. They picked up Ron Holland out of the G League Unite, which I think is a pretty good pickup there. And with the 37th pick via the Timberwolves, they traded for Bob Klintman out of Cairns. In terms of their free agency activity, Cade Cunningham, their star, their rookie star, their rookie draft pick, they signed him to a 5-year extension, 5-year, $226 million. They also re-signed or returned player Simone Fontecchio. Returns on a 2-year deal. Fontecchio, yep. And then from the Sixers, they picked up Tobias Harris. Obviously, the Sixers got Paul George, so they did an upgrade there. But they picked up Tobias Harris on a 2-year, $52 million deal, which is pretty pricey for Tobias Harris. But and what's funny, just really quick side talk, they were showing lifetime earnings between Tobias Harris and Klay Thompson. And Klay Thompson's lifetime earnings were $317 million, and Tobias Harris's was $300 million. So they were basically $17 million apart, which when you think about it in terms of their impact to the league, that is questionable. But in any case,
I agree.
I'm not questioning Tobias Harris or anything like that. I'm just saying when you look at that from that perspective, you're like, damn. Either the Warriors got a deal, or Tobias Harris was out there with a ski mask, taking some money.
I agree, man. That's highway robbery, man. So
yeah, a little bit. And then in terms of additional trades, they picked up Tim Hardaway Jr. from the Mavericks for Quentin Grimes, and then they signed Malik Beasley to a 1-year deal, and they signed Wendell Moore Jr. Or they didn't sign him; they got him via a trade with the Timberwolves. Wendell Moore Jr. And that's their activity for the up to this point.
Okay, so then as far as projected starting lineup, we have point guard Cade Cunningham. We also have shooting guard Jaden Ivey. We have small forward Tobias Harris, power forward Asar Thompson, the other side of the Thompson twins, Amen and Asar Thompson. And then we also have center Jalen Duren, who's also playing for the USA Select team as well. Looks pretty big out there too. He's given Anthony Davis some heartache sometimes out there from what I've seen. Then rotation pieces, we have point guard Marcus Sasser out of Houston, who played there last year. Again, also Thompson. You can kind of go back and forth. Ron Holland, the newly acquired via draft, Ron Holland. And then you also have center Isaiah Stewart. You have Tim Hardaway can come off the bench, right? it's going to be interesting to see what happens because, we talked about this in the past podcast that they fired Monty Williams for only a year, man. And now they're bringing in JB Bickerstaff. I don't know, man. I just thought they did that guy wrong, unfortunately. But we'll see. We'll see what JB Bickerstaff, he was the guy who had the Cleveland Cavaliers, and now he's going over here to the Detroit Pistons. We shall see what he does. But anyway, with all of this in mind, I thought that they did okay. We gave them a C. I think that, I think in my opinion, Donovan Clingan would have been a better pick than Ron Holland, in my opinion, to complement Jalen Duren. And I think they should have also kept the Cam Spencer because they traded him away to Memphis. So Harris isn't necessarily, Tobias Harris isn't necessarily a good shooter, but, he played for the Detroit Pistons before, and he has some veteran leadership there. Hardaway is streaky, right? So I don't know if they really necessarily met the shooting requirement thing, which is why we gave them a C. So,
I agree. In terms of their free agency, they had movement, but nothing that stands out and, kind of says, whoa, that's a pretty decent move.
Yeah. I agree with you, man. All right, bro. So let's go. We're going to the last team that we're going to cover, and then we're going to go over the overall winners and losers for both conferences for the overall draft and offseason transactions. So the next to last, and certainly not least team that we're going to cover is the Portland Trailblazers. So what we thought that they needed a small forward, a power forward, and also more shooting. So with that in mind, what did they do?
So the Portland Trailblazers had one draft pick, the number 7 pick. It was their own. And they drafted the aforementioned Donovan Clingan out of Connecticut. So they did pick him up. In terms of their trade activity, they picked up Justin Minaya to a 2-way contract. So that's just minor news. Yep. And then Denny Avdija joins via a trade from the Wizards. So Denny was a top draft pick, I want to say, 3 or 4 years ago?
Out of Israel.
Out of Israel, and they picked him up. And I thought, he was in a little bit of a tough spot being stuck between Poole and Kuzma. that's a tough spot to shine,
I hear you, but he actually did shine. He actually did shine last year.
He was starting on an upswing, so I was kind of questioning this trade, but I think it's a good pickup for Portland.
Right. All right. Yeah. I think, did you already mention they picked up the team option on Delano Banton?
I did not mention that. No.
Okay, so they picked that up as well. So here's what they did. So with that in mind, their projected starting lineup: they have point guard Scoot Henderson, shooting guard Anthony Simons. They now have the newly acquired Denny Avdija, the small forward. They have power forward Jeremy Grant, and then they also have the center DeAndre Ayton. Although there's talk because they drafted Donovan Clingan that DeAndre Ayton may now be on the move. We shall see. But in any case, they have a lot of centers in play because also have Robert Williams as well. Remember from the Boston Celtics?
Yeah, I like him.
I do too, and he's on that team. So as far as as far as rotation, they have Delano Banton, who they just picked up the team option for. He also played for the Boston Celtics, believe it or not, and he's a pretty good player. And then they also have the shooting guard, small forward, Shaedon Sharpe. More than likely, he might start, but it just depends. He's a very good player, very athletic. I don't know if you've seen this guy play, but he's pretty damn athletic. And then they also have the aforementioned Donovan Clingan and Robert Williams. So, they have decent talent. They gave up a lot, in my opinion, for Denny Avdija. He's a good player, though, but they have just a lot of centers on this team, man. They have Clingan, Ayton, Williams, and, Jeremy Grant and Denny Avdija. They might be duplicates of each other. I mean, they have good depth, but, this screams of more moves to come. But anyway, from that perspective, we gave these guys an offseason grade of a C. So that's pretty much what we covered. We covered all 30 teams over the last 2 weeks, going over the draft. We analyzed their draft picks. We analyzed their needs based on what they needed for that roster and how they addressed those needs based on these free agent acquisitions, trades, and so forth. So with all of that in mind, what I thought, I'm going to go ahead and give you the winners and losers from each conference. So from the Western Conference, here are the winners. We went ahead and put the Oklahoma City Thunder. We gave them an A+, and the Minnesota Timberwolves. The top 2 teams or top 3 teams in the West just got better with what they did.
The rich get richer.
The rich get richer, man. I mean, they both had outstanding off seasons. So that's the reason why we gave these guys
I
the
mean,
grades
yeah,
that we get.
highlighted with the Caruso pickup from Oklahoma and the Dillingham pickup for Minnesota. I think those were two really, really good moves for each of those organizations. Obviously, they did other things as well, but those two pickups were
Huge.
yeah,
Huge.
they were huge. There's going to be a lot of teams in the West. It's going to be tough to beat these two guys.
Yep, I agree, man. So, all right. So, as far as the losers, we put the Los Angeles Clippers. They lost Paul George. That's a tough shoe to fill, man.
Well, they played chicken with him. They didn't think he'd leave. Los Angeles native. They thought they could do something, and it bit them.
Yep. And then the Denver Nuggets. Although they tried to salvage a little bit here in the last couple of days, but they, in my opinion, they're picked pretty high to kind of be a title contending team this year. Their bench is pretty just unproven, man.
Yeah,
I don't see
it. They're suffering the curse of winning the championship and having to pay players, and Murray is up for a renewal. I think it's on hold for now till after the Olympics or whatever, but he's due. Obviously, Jokic is making a lot of money. Those things impact the salary cap, and these guys are just hamstrung. And the Denver Nuggets, I agree, it's a C. I don't know if it's completely their fault. It's hard. It's hard when you win a championship. Boston managed to get everybody under before everything exploded, and now they'll have at least a 1 to 2 year window to kind of potentially repeat and win a third one, maybe. But after that, you're going to see the same effect.
Yeah, the same thing. These rules are kind of making it really hard for dynasties to continue, right? Yep. All these rules were kind of set in play because the Warriors were too good, in my opinion. That's what I think. Why they did all this,
and because through a fluke they were able to pick up Kevin Durant through that. They wanted to kill all of that.
Right. They're like, okay, this organization is too smart. We're gonna have to change some things and make it hard so that everybody can't do what these guys are doing. So anyway, that's again the homer hat. I put it back on. Anyway, so all right, so let's go back to the Eastern Conference. Well, the winners for the Eastern Conference we had as New York Knicks. We gave them an A, and the Washington Wizards, man. The B+, they were the second highest grade we gave out of all the teams that we covered in the East. New York Knicks, they were very active. They started the whole offseason with the bang. OG Anunoby getting re-signed. Then they went to go ahead and get Mikal Bridges, right? I mean, they did well, man. It was just started there, and then some of their picks. I just job well done by the New York Knicks. And then the Washington Wizards, we just covered them. One of the last teams that we just covered. They had a pretty active offseason. They put some good pieces on their team. They're a team that's right now in the 12th seed. I think they're going to climb maybe a couple slots above that. This team is still in the rebuild, but they're a lot better than they were last year. And I thought they did a really good job.
As you mentioned, they can go the Twin Tower. They can go backup center with Alex Sarr and Valanciunas. I mean, I think the Valanciunas pickup was a really good pickup. And I think,
and Malcolm Brogdon too.
No, exactly. Absolutely. Malcolm Brogdon as well. But I think in terms of bigs, I think they're covered at least here for the next, 3 years, at least with Valanciunas and further with Alex Sarr, because, they'll have him for at least 5 years, assuming that they keep the option on the 5th year.
Right. Yeah. All right. So as far as Eastern Conference losers, we had the Brooklyn Nets. No other team got an F. And then we also had the Milwaukee Bucks with a D+. I mean, Milwaukee Bucks looked really old last year, man, and it's no fault of their own that Giannis got hurt, and without Giannis, that team looks old and slow. Giannis makes that team click, and without him, they look mediocre. So they need his health there to be, and this AJ Johnson guy. I mean, I thought that was a stretch, man. I didn't understand why they reached for that guy. Maybe they saw something that they saw with Giannis, slip into the 15th or 16th pick when they drafted him, and he's. If they do that draft all over again, he'd be the number 1 pick. I don't know. Maybe they saw something like that with AJ Johnson, but anyway, that's part of it.
I agree. But yet another team was feeling the effects of winning a championship, right?
Right. Exactly, man. All right. So now that we're done with the NBA draft and free agency is probably going to continue until next week. Now we're in the season of Summer League, right? The Summer League is here. We had the California Classic. We had the Salt Lake City Classic going on right now. Both of these are going on right now. But what I wanted to do is kind of, I went ahead and watched some of these games, and I just pretty much wanted to go ahead and just focus on the players that just got drafted this year. Not everybody, because it's going to be too much, right? But just the team, the players that we covered during this whole draft pre-shows and the analysis that we just did and all on the post-draft show. But anyway, So I want to go ahead and kind of tell you how I go about looking at how these players, do, right? The first test is eye test, right? The eye test will tell you who stands out for sure. And it takes you to watch the games to really see that. But it's going to be hard for us to watch every game. So the next thing you got to do is look at the stat lines, right? And, Twan and I play fantasy football. And, we know fantasy sports, how that, the value of the player comes and based on the stats they accumulate. The same thing goes with basketball, right? I play FanDuel basketball. I don't play a fantasy basketball league, but I do FanDuel, and I do that pretty much religiously, and I do pretty well on it. But, if you can't look at and watch the game and look at the eye test and look at the players that stand out, the other way is look at stats, right? And that'll tell you like how good a player really is doing if they're compiling a bunch of stats. Sometimes some of these players are just kind of empty stats, right? But that's why if you can't really watch the games, you want to look at their stats, right? So I'm going to go ahead and point out some of the guys that really stood out, okay? So the guy for Miami Heat, Khalil Ware, okay? Khalil Ware, if we're going to go ahead and pick like, the points is points, right? They get so many points for points. Then they get 1.2 points for rebounds, 1.5 points for assists, 3 points for a block or a steal, and then -1 for a turnover, right? But if you look at all that and you combine all that, Khalil Ware scored a total in one game, 42.7 points.
That's right.
In 29 minutes. That's a 1.47 points per minute clip. That's impressive. If you get 1 point per minute in FanDuel or any fantasy sports for basketball, that's pretty damn good. But he stood out big time. He had 2 games like that. He had one game at 1.47 points per minute, and the first game he had 32.2 points in 24 minutes. That gives you 1.34 points per minute. So he looked really good. And then the other guy, if you look at the opposite end of the spectrum, the ones who looked really bad, okay, the worst out of all of these guys was Kyle Filipowski. Kyle Filipowski had 5.3 points. That's points, assists, rebounds, blocks,
that's pretty
all
bad.
that stuff, right? 5.3 points in 16 minutes. That gives you 0.3.
Maybe there was a reason he dropped to the second round.
Maybe. He looked kind of slow out there, right? We thought maybe Zach Edey would be the guy looking slow. Kyle Filipowski looked pretty slow in his first game. We don't want to like base everything on just one game, right? I mean, everybody has off nights, right? And then the other guy that really didn't do very well in 12.4 points in 22 minutes is Bronny James. He had the second lowest efficiency from a fantasy perspective in points per minute played. So he had 0.56 points per minute, right? So, so I don't know if were there any players that you kind of wanted to find out like how they did?
I mean, did Dillingham play? No, Minnesota hasn't been.
He has not played.
He hasn't played yet. Yeah, I'm curious how he does. I'm curious how the Frenchmen play. When San Antonio.
They haven't played yet. I mean, that's going to come up next week because next week is the Vegas Summer League, and that's the big showcase for everybody. So that's when
that's the one that I'll pay more attention to. I have recorded the games and I will go back and watch them. But a lot of the things I like to look at too is second year players. Do they come in? Do they completely dominate? How different do they look? From their rookie season. Things of that nature. I think will be a nice tell. Obviously, I don't think Wembanyama is going to play. I'm assuming he's not going to play.
If he does, it's going to be very, very small minutes. I mean, he doesn't need to. Yeah. He doesn't need to. He's already proven it. He doesn't need to. If he does, he might play 5 minutes.
Correct.
Right? Correct. Kind of warmed up.
And speaking of Khalil Ware, shocker, the Miami Heat draft good.
Always, man. But let me give you some other noteworthy players. All right, I'll give you some other ones. Okay, so another guy that slipped, Dalton Connect. Okay,
correct.
Dalton Connect scored 26.4 points. This is again with all the stats, not just points. We're talking about assists, rebounds, steals, blocks, all that stuff, right? 26.4 points in the first game in 26 minutes. That's a 1.01 points per minute clip. And then in the second game, he had 20.9 points in 22 minutes at 0.95 points per minute. The thing about Dalton Connect, it's not bad. It's but the thing is, man, he's very inefficient. I mean, his shooting average like in the 20% range. It was pretty bad, right? Yeah, so his shot wasn't there, man. But he does a lot of other things to help you out. So another guy I'll go ahead and point out, the Thunder. Okay, remember we talked about the rich got richer. Okay,
yes.
Thunder, Dylan Jones. Okay, this guy was widely compared to a Josh Hart. Okay, because he does a lot of things. Right. So this guy scored 29.5 points in 32 minutes. That's 0.92 points per minute clip. Right. The next guy, Jay Mitchell on the Thunder again. He had 36.6 points in 28 minutes at a 1.31 points per minute. Second best to Kel'el Ware out of all the players that I've been following so far. And then Zach Edey, 42.5 points in 33 minutes. That's 1.28 points per minute. All of these guys were the best that I just pointed out. Everybody else.
Did Topic play?
No, he has not. No, he did not play. He did not play. So, but Stephon Castle, okay, in 21 minutes, he got 22.7 points. So that's 1.08 points per minute. Pretty efficient in 21 minutes, right?
Eddie, remind me again, how do defensive stats play on the scoring?
So steals and blocks are 3 points.
Okay.
So steals and blocks are 3 points each, right? So Zach Edey, I think, had like 4 blocks, for instance. So that's 12 points. So out of his 42 points, 12 of them were based on blocks alone, right? Nice. So that just kind of gives you an idea. Isaiah Collier out of Utah, 37.2 points in 29 minutes, 1.28 points per minute. That was second best, along with Zach Edey next to Kel'el Ware. Zach Edey and Isaiah Collier had the same efficiency from a points per minute standpoint in fantasy points. So again, if you can't watch the games and you can't, if these players don't pass the eye test and you're not watching the games, you go to the stat lines and kind of see from how many stats are they accumulating, because that tells you what are they doing as a player, right? They're not just shooting, right? You don't want just shooters, because shooters, you only get points. You can't get any other points other than just points, right? You want blocks, steals, all this stuff to make you a well-rounded player. And that's what fantasy kind of helps you kind of see the game differently. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out.
I like to look at how comfortable they look, how they're moving, how they without the ball, how are they positioning themselves, because sometimes you got players that position themselves well, and for whatever reason, somebody else didn't block off, and so they don't get the rebound. I like looking at things of that nature. I'm a fan of the eye test, but of course, as you mentioned, these fantasy stats, they accumulate from a well balanced perspective. In terms of blocks and steals and assists and the things that most people don't pay attention to. That seem to matter less than points, which if you're really paying attention, a block can change the whole tempo of a game, and that ends up being an easy bucket on the other end, and things of that nature. Steals obviously do that. So agreed.
So this is I wanted to kind of give a sneak peek as to what you're going to see, for us as far as coverage for the next few weeks for the summer league. Right, next week is the Vegas summer league. That's when you're going to see all these big players: Alex Sarr, Zachary Reese-Archet, all these top, Donovan Clingan, all these players that are like highly rated come out and play against the all the other guys that that are trying to vie for NBA rosters, right? Some of these guys are second players, and some of you are third and fourth year players that don't get much time, right? So it's going to be interesting. But I wanted to give you a sneak peek as to how we're going to kind of assess these players' performance based on eye tests. When we watch the game, and then the stats. I can tell you just from the eye test, the guy who stood out to me, man, out of everybody, Stephon Castle. He stood out big time from just the eye test. I wasn't even looking at stats. That guy looks freaking good, man. Another guy, Kel'el Ware at first kind of didn't look like he accumulated a lot of stats, but he just looked like he was trying to get his bearings straight. But once he got his, got his legs under him, he definitely started playing really, really well. Walker Kessler, man, he actually played really well, and he's not a rookie, but he was giving Zach Edey and Walker Kessler were battling, man. I mean, they Zach Edey held his own. I got to give it to him. He looks like the Memphis Grizzlies might got a steal with this guy, drafting him that early when we thought, what the hell are they doing, right? Yeah. But he looked pretty damn good, man. I got to give it to Zach Edey. He lost a lot of weight. He looks more versatile, just a little bit more agile.
He was playing with a little attitude too, which is something that he was showing less of.
He bumped one of the guys. So I forgot
he was doing the old Gary Payton 2 scratching of the head, like
you saw that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So But anyways, I just wanted to go ahead and just give the audience a taste of what we're going to cover next week. We're also going to cover kind of once the Olympics start, we're going to talk about the Olympic team. It's going to be interesting to see who's going to be starting. Right? There's a whole discussion on who should be the starting lineup because there's just a bunch of superstars on that team, and it's going to be interesting to see what Steve Kerr does. He might play Homer, of course.
So to me, the headlines, the offense of this conversation is who's going to start. But the defense, is who ends. I want to see who's there at the end.
Yeah.
Right. Especially if the game is tight. Right. Because some of these, some of these teams got some, Canada's got a pretty good squad. France has got a pretty decent squad. So it's gonna be interesting. Yeah, it's Australia. It's gonna be interesting how some of these players how tight they can keep it, how much US can actually run away with it, if at all. So I want to see who's kind of be the closing unit as opposed to the starting unit.
Yep. Yeah, we're going to cover all that. Maybe we could make that as one of our topics, who should be starting if it's not been already decided at that point. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and end the show, Twan. We covered, the last 15 teams from our post-draft free agency trade period. We covered the 9 through 15 in the East, and then the 7 through 15 in the West. And if you want to go ahead and look at our past podcasts, please feel free. This is your first time watching. Again, we're going live every Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Pacific. The reason why we're doing it live is because we want to hear from you. And, we heard a lot from Cheddar Steve. Cheddar Steve, thanks for participating if you're still there. But definitely we need to go ahead and have a little bit more appropriate comments for next time. Exactly, but we can't necessarily post everything. If it's something that we think is noteworthy and worthwhile to talk about, we'll go ahead and post it. But we appreciate your participation, team, and thanks for listening. This is Buzzer Beaters. I'm Eddie Aparicio. That's Anthony Twan Corral. You can find us on Rumble, YouTube, under the profile Grumblings Media, as well as your traditional podcast outlets such as Spotify, Google, Apple, and Pandora. You can also find us on Facebook and X. And Twan, notice that I did not say where it's formerly from.
Yes.
They figured it out already, bro.
At some point, we got to get rid of the formerly. Yes.
All right. Well, anyway, this is Buzzer Beaters signing off.
Hey everybody, this is Big John from Grumblings Media, and I just want to say thank you for watching our content. If you want to support our efforts here at Grumblings Media, just smash the subscribe button right here, totally free, or just go ahead and consume more of our great content. Click either one of these two boxes.